Hello and welcome to this video on a common decorative shrub or hedge used in landscaping, but also produces an attractive bonsai, a Coprosma. A Coprosma make very nice small bonsai that are relatively easy to maintain. While not the most beginner-friendly of species, they are readily available, replaceable and cheap, which means if you are going to start on something, they're a good option. Not just because they will produce a nice long-term bonsai if you can keep them alive, but if you lose them, they're not going to cost you a lot. Overall, the Coprosma is a very large family of evergreen shrubs used in garden landscaping. They can be very light green to almost yellow in leaf colour, to dark green and then very dark shades such as purple and black. One feature common to all Coprosma is that the leaves are shiny. It does produce a small fruit, although this is rarely the desired product. It will often be a bright orange or even a red or light blue colour. Different cultivars will drastically vary. The shrub grows up to 2 meters wide and 2 meters tall, or about 2 yards wide and tall. The trunk is often not very thick, and the majority of the mass is made up of many small, thin trunks, forming something more akin to a broom style than an actual bonsai itself. The bark is also often a very pale colour, somewhere between yellow and brown. The Coprosma itself can be found all across different parts of the world. Primarily it originates in places like Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, New Guinea and more. As with most things you find in Australia, and among other places, there is an unpleasant surprise in Coprosmas. When cut, they make a very disgusting smell. This makes their presence in the land of hobbits strange, as that should be happiness, sunshine, and gluttonous thieving barefooted hoodlums. Not stinky trees. Coprosma is a species typified by being a rather large shrub with dense foliage in its periphery. Through careful pruning, they can be kept very small, tight, and well ramified. It's not well suited to most styles except for a broom, windswept, and a few topiary styles, less so a bonsai style. To grow your Coprosma, you don't need anything special in terms of soil. In fact, any typical potting soil or mix will work. You may want to consider adding extra inorganic material, as this will help with drainage. You want to provide the typical bonsai soil features, retain a little moisture, not too much moisture, and free draining, just to be on the safe side. Watering is mostly straightforward. Water only as needed, and checking the soil for moisture before doing so. You do want to avoid too much water or too often, as they are prone to root rot. Fertilizing is slightly more difficult. Arguably only slightly. The Coprosma is a problem because standard fertilizers have too much nitrogen. They're too rich in it for a good bonsai Coprosma. For a garden specimen, they're fine. But what you'll get is that if you use typical fertilizer, and you follow it with the regular routine, you'll not get a good result. If you're not careful, you'll get a lot of length between the areas where leaves grow. This can be useful in the very early periods of bonsai development, where they will effectively act as a sacrifice branch, but over the long term, it will come at the cost of both growth and ramification. For most households or landscape purposes, this isn't really a problem, because they get pruned, let's say, more aggressively and with less consideration. Pruning is something that needs to be done regularly throughout spring, as the shrub wants to start growing very quickly. You do need to take some care when pruning, as the branches will die back slightly. The other issue is that new branches will only grow from where the leaves are now. To ensure that you'll get leaves in the long term, you must prune the bonsai so that the new branches grow from further back on the branch, and this will replace what's currently making up your silhouette. And the other issue is you need to promote ramification to get a denser foliage layer. You'll also, as a consequence, also need to plan replacement branches that will take over for those that are currently doing most of the heavy lifting. Wiring is also somewhat important. The branches will grow very quickly at first and become slightly thicker, The problem is that this new growth is just enough to cause the wire to cut in, but unfortunately it's not enough to actually contribute a great deal of growth in a short time. In fact, you could argue that branches may take many years to become notably thicker, and this means that the very small amount of growth will lead to scarring and damage, but it won't really provide any other benefit. You won't get any real notable growth. And this is why wiring is not done as often. If you are going to wire, make sure you do it on branches before they start forming new leaves, as you'll find that most of these species should drop their leaves at some point throughout autumn and winter. For the most part, you can leave the Coprosma in a sunny, bright position. It's better to protect it from the hottest part of the day, so partial shade can be useful, but depending on the size of the bonsai, how developed it is, how large the pot, and so on, you can get away without this. Repotting is a challenge. In our experience at least, it's better to pot up your Coprosma by planting it in a bigger pot. This is needed as we found that Coprosma do not tolerate root pruning really at all. If you are repotting, you want to do so at the end of winter or the start of spring. Ideally, before anything starts to really take off. Mostly because you want to avoid damaging the roots while it's growing. The pests you'll encounter are the usual suspects: aphids, scales, mite, and so on. Nothing especially challenging and nothing particularly unique. The Coprosma is a fast-growing shrub, and it can be kept indoors and outdoors. It's better outdoors, as with just about all bonsai. The leaves it produces will be shiny, attractive, and colourful, and given that it can produce fruit, you'll get flowers, although flowers are rarely the fact that you're looking to try and promote. The ideal fact you're trying to encourage is, initially at least, the foliage display, and to a much lesser extent, depending on the exact style you've chosen, the bare tree display, which is another reason that they can be a nice winter exhibit. They're not necessarily going to be active in winter, so they can stay inside for longer to be displayed, if you want to show them as a bare tree. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.